Hello. So today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking you through how we at Petey Performance get the best results, why we focus on returning our athletes to performance, why we don't just focus on returning athletes to play post-injury and solely focus on the injury. We focus on the athlete as a whole, as well as the reason behind why they keep getting injured. As a result of doing this, our athletes return to play with their teams with increased confidence, and as well as that, reduced risk of injury going forward. So the first thing you need to understand before we get into it is you need to understand the return to play myth. So it was previously thought that there was a specific timeline for every injury in which the athlete recovered and was capable then at the end of that timeline in returning to play. Unfortunately, that's not the way the body works. The body works through adaptation. It doesn't just work through healing time. That means you won't be automatically ready to return to play from an ACL reconstruction in 9 months. It means you won't be automatically ready to return to play from a grade 2 hamstring injury in 3 weeks. It means you won't be able to return to play from a grade 1 calf strain in 1 week. Different people are going to respond to different rehab programs differently. As well as that, it's too complex and multifactorial to just say that lifestyle factors don't play a part in the recovery of any injury, a recovery from any injury. And as well as that, some rehab and return to play programs are going to be more adapted and better and more individualized than others because they consider a number of different factors, as well as the fact that they're going to be graded and progressive in terms of how they expose the athlete to different physical qualities, different intensities, different velocities, and then the different components of the game progressively to get them closer to playing the game and also improving all of the physical qualities necessary in order to play the game at a high level. Those being your speed, your change in direction ability, your aerobic conditioning, your anaerobic conditioning, your strength, your jumping ability, etc. So if we're going to consider factors when putting together our return to play and our rehab program, all of these factors impact what sort of program we will put together. So the severity of the injury is obviously something I've touched on already, and it's something that is imperative to how we rehab our injury or return to play from our injury. So that would be in relation to our grade 1, our grade 2, our grade 3. And then we also have sub-classifications within that as well, in that we have an A, B, and a C, which also helps us to identify the position of the injury as well. The position of the injury impacts what we're going to do in the weight room, in that certain exercises are going to activate certain positions in certain muscles for different athletes. So you can't just have a one-size-fits-all program for hamstring rehab and return to play. Likewise, you can't do the same for calf. If somebody has an injury to their biceps femoris of their hamstring, then that's going to have to be rehabbed slightly differently than a semimembranosus or semitendinosus injury would be rehabbed. Likewise, if it's a grade 2C, it's not going to be rehabbed the same as a grade 1B. The mechanism of injury is also very important. So there's going to be a legacy of trauma there. The athlete is going to be less confident going into those actions. Anybody who's gone through an ACL reconstruction or an ACL or knee injury will know this. After you've suffered that injury and you've returned to play, you're a little bit more reluctant to step into that limb in a sidestep if that's the action in which you became injured previously. Your previous injury history is obviously going to be relevant. If you've had ankle injuries, then that's going to be relevant for any injuries around your knee or your hip on the same side, because if you're missing some reactivity and stability at that ankle, it's going to mean that you're going to over push through that hip and through that knee. Strengths and weaknesses as an athlete are incredibly important as well. Are you more of a ballistic athlete, more of a reactive athlete, or are you more muscularly driven, high force generation capability athlete? Your age is obviously going to have an impact on healing times as well, as it will on lifestyle factors and lifestyle stress. The position you play on the field is going to equally be important, because that's going to impart on your role, as will the playing characteristics of your role, your individual characteristics of how you're set up anthropometrically, so how tall you are, how quick you are, how aerobically fit you are. is going to play an impact on the return to play process too, as is your mindset and your psychological approach to the injury. Time in the season is going to lead to more pressure being put on yourself to return in certain time frames, and that can sometimes delay healing. It can also sometimes mean that we have to go a little bit more aggressive in our approach if there's finals coming up and you absolutely must be available for them. And then performance priorities around when do you want to perform in the season? Is this phase of the season okay for development, or is this phase of the season when you should really be peaking and we have to place a heavy emphasis on going with a more aggressive approach to get you back on the field of play? In regards to our return to play progression, I'm just going to outline generally how we do return to play around here. Usually the timeline, or not the timeline, but the sequence that we use is we start with return to loading in our early phase. Once we can tolerate loading of higher intensities, higher velocities, and we reduce our rep ranges down and maybe move from more yielding isometrics to more overcoming stuff, and we're getting into deeper ranges of motion, we're accessing deeper and greater ranges of motion, then we might move to return to jumping if the athlete is ready to tolerate it. From return to jumping, we will return to running mechanics drills specifically. After we've returned to running mechanics drills, we've done some resisted accelerations, we may go to return to change of direction. Then we might go to return to maximal sprinting, so max speed exposure. Then we might return to training, transitioning back in with the team whilst doing our own work as well, and then gradually return to match play over the weeks as well. Return to play isn't something that just happens all of a sudden. As I've already said, we break down the components of the sport, then we gradually build it back up as the confidence of the athlete equally increases or concurrently increases as they continue to tolerate higher intensity, higher velocity, more sports-specific demands as the time increases throughout the rehab and return to play process. We progress volume as well throughout each of the weeks until we return to play, as we do intensity on the field of play. And we also don't neglect fitness, we don't neglect skills, and we don't neglect confidence of the athlete. We rebuild all of this step by step. Then when we look at just the approach that we generally use when we're moving through the rehab to return to play spectrum, generally we use a seesaw approach. So we'll start by having a heavy emphasis on the return to loading phase and a heavy emphasis on strength, volume and gym work that we will do in the pitch. And that could be med ball work, that could be isometrics, that could be isotonic loading, heavy eccentrics, it could be simply concentrics, it could be some plyos in the gym potentially as well, assisted plyos, and then our pitch work is going to be very low in volume. But as we transition through that phase of the transition phase, mid phase to late phase of the return to play process, we're going to move from having high strength volume and gym work to much lower exposure of strength volume and gym work, or lower volume, but the intensity is going to be quite high, and our pitch volume is going to be way higher than it was at the start in the late phase. So I'm going to take you through a few case studies here of some common injuries that I deal with and some common athletes that we have helped to return to play as well, just to give you examples of the sort of stuff that comes up and how we've solved these problems for these athletes. So Eamon came to me with a recurring hamstring issue bilaterally, so on both sides, that had been hampering his athletic career for a number of years. His max speed was 9 meters per second when he tested it on GPS, but he was very caught up in numbers, and he was very caught up in his high-speed running volume that he was hitting, and he could see that his high-speed running volume was dropping through the weeks because he had this niggling pain in his hamstring. He had constant DOMs on his right side of the hamstring, nerve pain up his leg and into his glute, and he really just lacked trust in his body. He felt like he was just waiting for the next injury to happen because he had been through this all before, season by season. He couldn't play the game that he wanted to play. His confidence on the pitch was very low because he played a very explosive inside forward type game, and he was questioning whether he'd ever be able to be reliable for his teammates again. So the problem was, Eamon was an absolute beast in the gym, but he felt very fragile on the pitch. So when the speeds and the volumes of running volume went up, as well as reactive work, generally he felt like he couldn't sustain it. He tried to solve this problem himself by doing more strength volume in the gym for his hamstrings. But his hamstrings were incredibly strong, really. He'd also tried some technical drills, but he didn't really know where to go with them and how to progress them. So the same cycle of injury just kept returning and representing or reappearing every few weeks throughout every single season. He knew his club needed him fit, but reliability wasn't there for him to put his hand up every week and say, look, I can play this week or I can train this week. So the impact was he lost a lot of trust in his body. It restricted his performance significantly on the field. And then he was suffering from a lot of stress and mental fatigue, as a lot of athletes would if they've lost their identity as an athlete and they're not able to play, even though they know they're a better player than they're able to give themselves credit for out on the pitch, with their body preventing them from doing so. So his old way was focusing heavy on strength without thinking about on-pitch demands whatsoever, other than looking at the GPS metrics. He was doing technical drills, but he was doing them inconsistently and they weren't progressed whatsoever. And then he was very reactive to managing injuries throughout the season when they came, rather than finding the root cause. Everything we did. So as you can see from that video, we did some things quite differently to what he had usually done. We didn't hang our hats on strength as the one true quality that he absolutely had to improve. Although we did do some strength volume, we worked on other areas which I saw were being neglected and underdeveloped, and he had poor coordination and control in. So our first phase was foundations and isolation, really, of the root issue. We built lumbopelvic control and core strength in this phase. We targeted his foot and ankle stiffness and reactivity because that was lagging behind any other physical quality, really. We rebalanced his left and right strength, symmetry, and coordination of how he was sequencing movements such as hip locks, etc., and switches. Focused on finding and owning positions relevant to speed and change of direction through some rangefinder drills, through some specific prep drills and specific preparatory exercises, as you saw, that replicate the actions of the game, such as change of direction, deceleration, and linear speed. Phase two then was the integration phase. We shifted focus to plyos and linear speed mechanics, focusing on speed mechanics drills heavily in the early phase of this phase two. We introduced control change of direction drills to build efficiency, and it was a heavy coaching emphasis placed on this, in that he needed to understand how to move more efficiently and change the direction, rather than being really squatty and really muscle driven in his change of direction and deceleration like he was previously. We taught him to move without fear and stop obsessing over data. So we just got reps and reps and reps in and got him way more confident in how he was moving and how it was feeling to execute these movements. And then in phase three, we returned him to play with more chaos as well. So gradually we reintegrated him back to team training by monitoring his GPS metrics, as well as exposing him to higher volumes of speed work, higher volumes of decelerations than he had done previously, and as well as expose them to aerobic and anaerobic conditioning and high volumes of tempo running, high speed running as well. We continued the gym work, now matched to the sprint demands as well of the game, and we changed how he moved and prepared him for match and training demands to come. And then he managed to transition back in with his team, and now he's played a full season, and this is for the first time in years that he's managed to do this. So he was available throughout the season. He's had no recurring hamstring injuries whatsoever, which is an absolute amazing achievement. His confidence has been restored and he's no longer running in fear. He can just focus on playing football. He hit a lifetime PB of 9.76 meters per second. Better throw in that 0.06 as well, which if any of you have worn GPSs will know that that's absolutely rapid. The impact on him then, he's playing freely again. He doesn't second guess his body or second guess himself on the pitch, whether he can go for that ball, whether he can go and chase down that defender, whether he can make that run into space. He's focused on the game rather than on his body. He's trusted by his teammates again, and he's playing fantastically well as well, and they've had a good season so far this season. And he knows how to self-manage his body, having gone through all of the work with me where he was incredibly diligent throughout. Huge, huge success. Secondly, then, another really common issue that I run into is this other athlete, Owen, who was a chronic groin client. Generally, athletic groin pain or osteitis pubis is something that I see quite a lot of athletes coming to work with me with. He was really frustrated with chronic pain across his body. So he had groin pain, he had back pain, he had neck pain in the past as well. He felt he had no consistent pathway back to playing hurling. He was always bouncing from one injury or one chronic pain area to another. He lacked confidence in his body. Sprinting and high intensity movements really felt like a risk, so he was really reluctant to do so. He felt he wasn't ready to even get back to any sort of training with his team whatsoever because his body was broken in his mind, really. He struggled mentally with a feeling that his body wasn't reliable enough to commit to playing the game that he loved, which he really dearly missed. So his beliefs that we had to kind of help him to break, I guess, and achieve new beliefs was he felt his body was broken after years of stop-start rehab. He felt his groin and back pain would always come back. He was convinced that his low training age for speed and change of direction meant he was a step behind everybody else. He thought he was strong because he had gym experience, but he knew he lacked the right kind of strength and efficiency in specific movements. So you can see there that the impact that the injury and the chronic pain was having on Owen was that he couldn't train or play consistently at all, and this left him really isolated from his previous environment of team sport with all of his friends. He was in a constant cycle of pain and flare-ups, draining, and this drained like his own motivation and his own self-belief, and he had some self-limiting beliefs as a result. He felt stuck. He invested heavily in rehab but wasn't seeing any lasting results whatsoever. His old way was investing heavily in short-term rehab fixes, but these weren't solving the issue or weren't identifying the root issue whatsoever. He had placed a heavy focus on isolated hip and groin work without any integration into more efficient movement patterns. He was inconsistent with his rehab because he kept flaring it up, having to back off, let it settle, and then go back at it again. There was no bigger picture, long-term progression to him back to sport, really, or focusing on getting him back to sport. And he wasn't using any GPS or objective data guiding his exposures whatsoever. It was really just all based on feel, so there was no metrics whatsoever. how we got him back to play then was phase one was the foundations phase. We focused on his lumbo-pelvic control, hip lock, and reactivity at the foot and the ankle. So we started to integrate into more sport-specific movements and didn't just focus on the area that had the pain, which was his groin or his back in the past as well. We addressed his foot and ankle stiffness and his big toe mechanics. So we focused on really developing everything that we could to try to help him out in how he was applying force into the ground. We strengthened his groin for sure. We also strengthened his calves and his glutes with progressive loading patterns and progressive loading over time. Phase two then was confidence at speed. So we rebuilt sprint mechanics using a fast to fit method or framework. And that was the protocol we used of a 10-30 protocol, where he was doing dribble bleeds to improve his front side mechanics and his intent to actually attack the floor, and then building volume through that as well, so that when he went to sprint, he changed completely how he was sprinting through this 10-30 fast to fit protocol. We used a lot of extensive plyos and progressed them to more intensive plyos and more intensive running mechanics drills and more chaotic or challenging or complex running mechanics drills over time. We introduced GPS monitoring as well in here to track his exposures and his volumes of work safely, and to show him that he was progressing not just in terms of field but also by the numbers that were going up as well. And then in phase three, we returned to play and chaos. So we gradually reintegrated him back with the team and back into match play as well, which was a huge win. We gradually, concurrently with this, improved his aerobic and tolerance to running volume through tempo runs and conditioning. And then we made him stronger with more efficient movement across linear speed, change of direction, and movement under fatigue on the pitch as well. Huge wins with this was Owen was able to return to team training and match play after 4 years away, which is absolutely huge. He became stronger, more reactive, and more confident in going to high intensity, so he didn't have to worry about it. He wasn't seeing himself as fragile anymore. He was trusting his body more, is the best way to put it. We built efficiency in sprinting and change of direction, hitting quality exposures without fear. We hit speed PBs and finally felt confident on the field again. We were getting up to midway between 8 and 9 meters per second, I believe. And that was pretty big after 4 years away from any sort of team sport and a couple of years where he couldn't really train at all. We learned how to manage his volume and training load properly as well. He learned how to do that through our extensive time working together. We had loads of conversations around what his body was responding to, what he needed to do in order to elicit the adaptation that he wanted to achieve, and how to move his body more efficiently so he would be able to get himself out of pain. Now he trains and plays without constant anxiety of another flare up. He's a clear system and framework that keeps him progressing. He's access to a stronger aerobic base as well, and better tolerance for volume on feet. And he's got the physical tools to handle higher intensity match play as well, which is absolutely massive. He's played the whole season as well, which is absolutely huge after so long away. And he checked in with me last month to let me know that he's feeling way better in himself as well now that he's gone back to the sport that he loves. Now, our third and final athlete is Connor. ACL reconstruction, something that I deal with quite frequently as well, because obviously I have extensive experience working with this injury, not just myself, with other athletes as well. He's a semi-professional footballer in the League of Ireland. And he said in his testimonial that coming to work with Pete was the best decision that he made throughout his injury, which was quite flattering, and I'm very grateful to have him come and to have the opportunity to coach him and guide him back to play. So his background was he had a right leg ACL reconstruction, patellar tendon graft. When he came to me, he was 5 months post-op operation. He was cleared to run, but felt like he was running on one leg. He knew something was off and he wasn't running efficiently. He wasn't feeling good on the pitch. He was actually getting into more and more pain as the weeks went on. He lacked a lot of confidence in his knee and in his movement efficiency on the field. He felt frustrated and unsure if he'd ever trust his leg again. He felt afraid of re-injury every time he sprinted or changed direction, and he hadn't done much of that whatsoever. He felt strong in the gym but weak on the pitch. He felt like the traditional method of ACL rehab had left him short-sighted in terms of the physical qualities necessary to play football. he'd hammered strength and he got really, really strong, but he didn't feel like he was himself. He could feel the lag in every stride in that affected limb. He missed his reactivity really in that limb. The challenge was he had a quad asymmetry of about 20%, and he had a 50% deficit in his single leg CMJ. So after 5 months, he'd done really, really good to get that deficit in strength down to 20%. We want to get it closer to 10% or within 10%. He had very low confidence in high velocity actions, but if you look at his counter movement jump, it just simply wasn't there. His ability to bounce and execute higher velocity actions just wasn't in that limb because he hadn't been doing it throughout the rehab. He was hesitant to deceleration as change of direction, as he should be really, because his body was giving him the clues that he wasn't going to be able to tolerate it. So his old system was generic gym, traditional ACL rehab, strength first, and then we'll transition you back to return to play when your metrics of jumping ability is at about 50%. But we're not going to worry about how you're executing it or how you're feeling. He'd been cleared to run, but he hadn't done any speed retraining or focus on trying to get his bounce back in his reactivity. He'd only been given low intensity conditioning, so they were focused on fitness over freshness and fitness over speed, whereas we use quite a different approach here at Petey Performance. He was managing his body built by or focused on pain, but his pain was getting worse with every session as he hiked the volumes up and continued to run inefficiently. So the new system, the fast to fit system that we practice, his gym work was going to be based on individualized mechanics and a reactivity focus there because his strength was already at a really high level. We wanted to focus on sprint mechanics as well and progressing them over time based on his response to how he was moving, and his execution of high quality reps was very important. It wasn't just about week 1, you've ran 10 meters or sprinted 10 meters. So week 2, now we're going to sprint you 15, 20 meters. We wanted to see if he was doing it efficiently and feeling good before we progressed them. And then we did the exact same thing with change of direction drills, increasing the velocity of him coming into the cut or coming into the decel over time through using all of our extensive progressions that we have. And then we wanted to rebuild his performance really on the field and improve his confidence by executing tasks that were relevant to the game of football. So we got him cutting, we got him executing a number of different movements sequentially in order to replicate the actions that he's going to have to execute as a winger in or a fullback in soccer. So how do we do that? Basically, we started in 3 phases. Again, we were 12 weeks working together. Phase 1 was the foundations and the feedback. So we rebuilt his coordination around marches, A-skips, and wall drills. So lower intensity drills, but the positions and the patterns are really important because those are the same positions and patterns we want to find when we're sprinting down the line. We focused on lumbopelvic control and foot and ankle reactivity again with him because he had already worked on his quad strength. We did expose him to more strength volume around the quads, around the hamstrings, around the calves, etc. as well. But it wasn't everything that we did. We reinforce quality over quantity, and we reinforce intensity over volume because we were going to start to build him towards more volume on the pitch, so we weren't going to have the opportunity to recover from as much strength volume. Phase 2 then was load, lengthen, and explode. We added controlled plyometrics and changes of direction. We introduced progressive sprint exposures and got him up to sprinting greater than 40 meters. Again, we used the 10-30 protocol here to improve his sprinting mechanics and get it more frontside, more bouncy, more reactive, and more efficient. We also exposed them to just maximal accelerations and used a lot of sleds and resisted sprinting to get him more confident and competent in accelerations. And then his quad asymmetry, we got from 20% down to 11% and then down to 1% in 10 weeks. His single leg CMJ deficit, we got from 50% down to less than 10% by the end of our 12 weeks working together. Phase 3 then was return to chaos as it had been previously. So max effort cuts and decelerations, lots of curvilinear running, cuts in multiple ranges of motion, different actions executed sequentially, as we've said. Back sprinting greater than 40 meters with confidence. So we got him up to 50 meters, I believe, of sprint volume and sprint exposure, potentially some flies of 40-meter build-in, 10-meter max effort. Lots of conditioning as well and team integration back into his football training. And then he returned to play in July, 9 months post-surgery. When he returned to play, he was sprinting freely and changing direction without fear. His strength and power symmetry was completely restored. So he was within 10%, which was fantastic. That's generally the baseline you want to get to. He was mentally ready to compete at team and League of Ireland first team level. He had patience, or he learned that patience was incredibly important throughout this process, and not to rush the return to play process. Really focus on trying to come back moving more efficiently and more effectively than you were when you suffered the injury in the first place. And then the quality of that work is way more important than the quantity of that work. So high intensity, fresh when you're doing your speed drills, that's going to really improve your ceiling of what you can achieve when you are fresh. And also, it's going to still improve your conditioning and your tolerance to those execution of those tasks in the game. The lessons he learned were speed is the tide that lifts all boats. If you can improve your max speed, generally all volumes or all intensities and velocities of running below that will become easier. If you can tolerate high intensity actions, everything below that became easier. So if you can sprint for huge volumes, then running a few tempo runs is going to be fine if you're working on your aerobic system concurrently, or if you're just relatively aerobically fit. Connor's Fast to Fit journey proves that ACL rehab is not just about returning to play, it's about returning to performance. You don't want to return in the same place that you were when you suffered the ACL injury, because then you're likely to suffer ACL injury again. The focus has to be transforming your athletic ability, coming back a new and improved version of yourself. And that is how you return to performance versus return to play. Final message then is return to play is a process. It's not a set date in time. Your goal has to be return better than ever, not just return to the field. If you want to return better than you once were, your rehab and return to play needs to be specific, progressive, and tested using relevant KPIs and relevant metrics. If it's not, you're just doing a general program and hoping for the best, and that just doesn't cut it with recurring injuries. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, just drop me a message. You can catch me over on all my social media channels, Petey Performance, or you can drop me an email at peteyperformance@gmail.com. If you want to book in for a free athletes assessment, there will be a link in the bio and we can have a conversation. Other than that, I wish you the best on your athletic journey.